Kansas Territory, late spring of 1873, the wind rolled across the open prairie like the breath of something ancient, and her dress was torn near the hem when she stumbled the third time, dropping to her hands and knees in the tall grass. Josephine Hartley tasted dust and blood when she tried to swallow. The sun blazed overhead with no mercy, and the wide open land stretched in every direction. Her boots were ruined, her hands scraped raw. She had not seen another soul in 2 days. Her husband had died 6 weeks ago, and with him went the last ounce of safety. The wagon train had split near Council Grove, and she had lagged behind, trying to soothe her fevered son. Then the sickness took both her son and daughter within 3 days. She buried them with her own hands under a cottonwood tree and carved their names into the bark with a kitchen knife. Now 23, widowed, barefoot, and utterly alone, she had wandered west until her food ran out, then her water. She had not eaten in 2 days. Her hands trembled when she lifted them to shade her eyes. She saw no one, just grass, sky, and heat. Then she heard hooves. Josephine tried to stand, but her legs gave out. She sank back into the dirt and turned her head, blinking against the sun. A horse crested the rise, a tall bay with a wide blaze down its face. A man rode it, lean and upright in the saddle, with a rifle strapped to his back and worry already drawn across his face as he kicked the horse into a gallop. He pulled up hard, dust swirling. "Hey," he said, already swinging down. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her lips cracked when she tried to speak. "Water." He dropped beside her, pulling a canteen off his saddle. "Here, easy now." His hand was warm and strong as he lifted her head. She drank, coughing once, then drank again. "You alone?" he asked, looking around. She nodded. "My wagon, gone. Husband died. My children," her voice broke. "They're gone too." His jaw shifted like he was biting back something hard. He looked to be in his 30s, with sun-browned skin and a quiet steadiness in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, voice low. "I'm real sorry." She closed her eyes, dizzy. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I do not know." "All right," he said, already looping the reins around his wrist. "We'll figure it out." He lifted her gently, with the care of someone who had done it before, not rushing, not rough. She sagged against him, too weak to hold herself upright. "I'm Callum Tate," he said as he swung up behind her in the saddle. "I got a ranch about a mile east. We'll get you fed." "Cleaned up." Josephine leaned her head back against his shoulder, too tired to answer. The ride was a blur of sway and sun. His arm braced firm around her middle, his chest solid behind her. The scent of leather and horse and pine clung to him. When they reached a low hill and crested it, she saw a ranch house in the valley below, simple, whitewashed, and clean. A barn stood off to one side and smoke curled from the chimney. "Home," he said. "You just hold on." She did. Callum's sister, a sharp-eyed widow named Ruth, met them at the door. She helped carry Josephine inside and got her settled in a spare bedroom. Callum brought in broth and bread, but Josephine could only sip a little before sleep claimed her. She woke the next morning with clean sheets beneath her, a soft cotton nightgown on her body, and the sound of chickens outside the window. Callum was sitting in the corner chair, reading a Bible with the spine worn bare. He looked up when she stirred. "Morning." She blinked slow. "You stayed." "I did." She studied him. "Why?" He set the Bible down. "Because you were alone out there, and no one should be." Her throat tightened. "I buried my children," she said. "Joshua was 6, Julia was 4. I held them both while they burned up with fever." Callum stood slowly and crossed to her side, kneeling. "I have not known that kind of loss," he said, "but I have known quiet and I have known loneliness. I am not leaving you to either." Her eyes blurred. "You do not even know me," he smiled faintly. "No, but I know you need someone, and I can be that someone." She stared at him, unsure what to say. He looked down, then back up, voice steady. "I will not push you, but I will make one promise." "What kind of promise?" she asked. "I promise you will not bury another sorrow alone, not while I have breath in my body." Her breath caught. No one had spoken to her like that, not in years. Not even her late husband, who had been kind but distant, more concerned with land than her heart. But Callum saw her. Not just the widow, not just the broken woman, he saw her, and that did something to her chest. Over the next week, she grew stronger. Ruth brought her dresses that fit, and Callum made sure she had time outside, sitting on the front porch with a blanket across her legs as the prairie wind rolled in. He never asked for anything. He just showed up with coffee in the morning, fresh eggs on her plate, a book left on the side table. He mended the fence one afternoon while she sat nearby, and she watched the way he moved with quiet purpose, steady and sure. "I used to want to go back east," she said one evening as they watched the sky turn orange. "Before I married, I thought maybe I would teach." He glanced at her. "Do you still want that?" She shook her head. "No, I want something quiet now, something rooted. I want to feel the earth again under my feet and know it will not fall away." Callum's voice was soft. "Then stay here, with us." She turned toward him, heart thudding. "You would want that." "I would." He met her eyes. "I want you here, Josephine." She reached out, fingers trembling, and laid her hand over his. He closed his over hers, and in that silence between them, something deep took root. The wind had shifted by morning, cooler and laced with the scent of wet cedar. It had rained softly before dawn, just enough to leave beads of water clinging to the porch railing where Josephine sat with a shawl tucked around her shoulders. The prairie looked brushed clean, the grass deeper in color, the sky pale with a thin scrim of cloud. Callum was working the paddock fence with his sleeves rolled to the elbow and a strip of rawhide clenched between his teeth. She watched without speaking, the quiet between them easy now. She had not asked to stay on his land, and he had not asked her to leave. The days had begun to fall into rhythm. Ruth came and went between the house and the barn, always brisk in her steps, but she paused beside Josephine that morning, holding a basket of folded linens. "You have a hand for mending?" Ruth asked, not unkindly. Josephine nodded. "I do." Ruth held out a small bundle of shirts, neatly torn at the cuffs and elbows. "These could use it, I'd be obliged." Josephine took them with care. "I'm grateful for the chance." Ruth gave a short nod. "You do it well, you'll have more." By the time the sun reached its peak, Josephine had finished the shirts and set them in a clean stack at the foot of her bed. She found herself standing near the window after, watching the horses shift in the corral while Callum leaned against the gate, speaking low to a young ranch hand. Later that afternoon, Callum came in through the kitchen door, boots trailing mud. He washed at the basin and dried his hands with a cloth before crossing into the parlor, where Josephine was sewing a patch onto one of Ruth's aprons. "You ever see a foal born?" he asked. She looked up from her stitching. "No." "Well, you might get your chance. One of the mares is close." "I've been watching her belly drop and her gait slow." Josephine set the apron in her lap. "May I come see her?" He reached for his hat. "If you've got the strength for it." They walked side by side to the barn, the air warm around them, the sky opening wide above. Inside, the mare stood in the far stall, breathing slow and heavy. Her coat was damp at the flanks, her eyes half-lidded. "She's calm," Josephine said softly. "She trusts me." Callum leaned on the stall door. "Had her since she was 2 winters old." Josephine stepped closer, fingers curling around the wood rail. "What will you do when the time comes?" "Keep her steady," he said. "Make sure the foal comes out right. It's a quiet thing, birth, but work all the same." She glanced at him. Like grief, he looked over at her, something unreadable in his eyes. That too. They stood in silence, the mare shifting her weight behind the wood. Josephine said, "I haven't touched a horse since I lost mine. I was afraid I'd forget how." "You haven't," he said. She lifted her hand and reached toward the mare, resting her palm gently against the warm shoulder. The mare didn't flinch. "I used to ride every morning before the children woke," she said. "It was the only time the world felt still." "You want to ride again," he said, not asking. She nodded. "Then you will." She lowered her hand. "You make things sound so certain." "I don't mean to, but I don't say what I don't mean." She looked up at him. "You've lost someone too, haven't you?" He nodded once. "My father. He went out one spring to mend a fence and never came back. Horse came home without him. We found him 2 days later, fell into a gully and broke his neck." Josephine closed her eyes. "I'm sorry." Callum's voice was steady. "He raised us plain but decent, and he taught me to pay attention. That's what I try to do now, pay attention to what's needed." She turned to face him fully. "And what do you need, Callum?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his words were quiet. "Someone who doesn't flinch when the wind changes." She held his gaze, the barn silent around them. "I don't break easy," she said. "I know." They stood close enough to feel the warmth off each other's skin, but neither moved. The moment held, not rushed, not forced. Just there, outside, the wind shifted again. The sky began to darken at the edges, and the first sound of thunder rolled in from the west. Callum glanced toward the open door. "Storm'll be here before dark." "Will the mare be all right? I'll stay with her," he said. "She's not alone." Josephine looked out at the sky, then back to him. "Neither am I." He didn't speak, just nodded once, and that said enough. The storm passed in the night. By morning, the light had returned thin and golden, filtering through the lace curtain in Josephine's room. The air still held the scent of wet soil and wood smoke. She rose slowly, her body stronger now, steadier in its movements. Her hair had dried in soft waves, and she braided it back with practiced fingers before pulling on one of Ruth's lone dresses, the fabric worn but clean. When she stepped into the kitchen, the stove was already lit, and Ruth was slicing boiled potatoes with efficient hands. "He stayed out there all night," Ruth said, not looking up. "Didn't even come in for bread." Josephine moved toward the back door. "Is the mare all right?" "She is. Foal came just before dawn." Josephine paused, hand on the latch, and Ruth set the knife down. "He'll be hungry." "That's all." Outside, the land was quiet again, the sky soft with early sun. She followed the path toward the barn, her boots leaving faint marks in the damp earth. A crow called once from the windbreak, then went still. Inside, Callum sat on an overturned bucket, his arms resting on his knees. The mare stood behind him, drowsing, and beside her the foal lay in the straw, legs too long for its body, nose twitching as it dreamed. Josephine stepped in, the straw crunching underfoot. He turned his head. "Didn't think I'd wake you." "You didn't." Ruth said, "They're both well." "They are." He looked back at the foal. "Took her time, but she did it right." Josephine moved closer. "What will you call him?" "Haven't thought on that yet." She crouched beside the stall, careful not to startle the mare. "He looks unsteady still. He'll stand soon. Might take a few tries." Josephine glanced at him. "Like people." Callum met her gaze, and for a long moment neither spoke. Then he said, "I dreamed of my father last night, first time in years." She sat on the edge of the feed bin. "What was the dream?" "He was teaching me to shoe a mule. Kept saying, 'Steady hands, son. The animal knows when you're unsure.' Did you ever shoe one?" "Plenty. Still hear his voice sometimes when I'm working." Josephine folded her hands in her lap. "I still hear my daughter humming. She used to make up songs while she brushed my hair." Callum rested his forearms on his knees again. "You ever sing?" "Only to them, and only when no one else could hear." He tilted his head. "You should again, when you feel ready." She gave him a small look. "Would you?" "I would." They sat in the quiet then, the mare shifting once behind them. The foal stretched, one leg kicking weakly against the straw. Callum rose, brushing straw from his trousers. "Come with me," he said. She followed him out of the barn, across the yard, past the well and the chicken coop. He led her behind the house, where the land sloped gently toward the edge of a creek that had widened with the rain. The water moved slow and clear, the banks thick with new grass. "This land used to be Cherokee hunting ground," he said. "Before the government pushed them east." Josephine stepped closer to the water. "Did they live here long? Long enough to know the land better than I ever will." She crouched to dip her fingers in the current. "It's cold. Snowmelt from the Flint Hills runs down this way." She looked up at him. "Why bring me here?" "I thought you might want to choose a place." "For what?" "For remembering." Josephine stood slowly, her fingers dripping water. "I buried them near a cottonwood tree. I carved their names with my knife. It's far from here." He nodded once. "I talk to them sometimes," she said. "Even now, you should. They were yours." She wiped her hand on her skirt. "I don't know how to start again. You don't have to all at once. And if I don't know what I want, you'll learn. I'm not going anywhere." She breathed in the scent of damp earth and grass. "If I stayed, what would that mean, for now?" he asked. "It means you'd have a place that knows your name. You'd wake up warm. You'd eat meals with people who look you in the eye." Josephine's voice was quieter. "And later," he stepped closer. "Later, if your heart bends that way, it means you'd never be alone again." She held his gaze. "You're not what I expected. I'm not trying to be anything but honest." She nodded once. "Then I'll stay." He reached for her hand, slow and sure, and she let him take it. They stood there as the creek moved past, the morning light rising stronger behind them. Neither spoke again, but the silence felt whole. The evenings had turned cooler, the kind that asked for a shawl even after a day baked in sun. Josephine stood near the clothesline, pinning up a damp sheet, her fingers working without thought. The scent of soap drifted in the air, clean and bright. Behind her, the sound of calf bells drifted in from the pasture, low and hollow. Callum was repairing the hinge on the cellar door, crouched low with a hammer in hand. When it slipped and scraped his knuckles, he didn't curse, just pressed the edge of his shirt to the blood and kept working. Josephine watched him a moment, then reached for the last clothespin. "You always fix things yourself." He didn't look up. "Most days, Ruth used to say I'd rather patch something than replace it. She's not wrong." He stood, flexing his hand once. "It's cheaper." She folded her arms. "It's also careful. Some folks don't bother." He gave her a look that lasted a beat longer than necessary. "You're not some folks." She turned back to the line, smoothing the edge of the sheet. "Neither are you." Later, Ruth left for town with the wagon, taking eggs and butter to trade. The ranch hand rode out to check fence lines beyond the east ridge. By late afternoon, the house stood quiet except for the ticking of the mantel clock and the rattle of wind against the shutters. Josephine sat on the porch steps, a needle threaded through a length of calico in her lap. Callum brought out a jar of pickled green beans and 2 tin cups. He passed one to her and sat on the bottom step. "You always this quiet?" she asked. He set the jar between them. "Only when I mean to listen." She sipped from the cup. "You're hard to read." He picked up a green bean and bit into it. "I was told once I keep too much tucked in." "By who?" "My mother." Josephine tilted her head. "What was she like?" "Small woman, strong back. Never raised her voice, but you knew when you'd gone too far." "Does she still live nearby?" "She's buried beneath an elm about a mile south, beside my father." Josephine nodded slowly. "You visit on her birthday." "Sometimes when I don't know what to do next." She looked down at the calico in her lap. "I've never had land last long enough to bury anyone near." Callum's voice lowered. "Then this place can hold them for you, in the ways that matter." She didn't answer right away. The wind shifted, brushing hair against her cheek. She tucked it behind her ear. "I thought I'd feel more grief out here," she said. "But it's something different, like the sorrow doesn't crowd me the way it did. Out here, it's got room to stretch," he said. "And so do you." That night, they lit the oil lamp early. Josephine peeled apples near the fire while Callum carved a handle for a rusted hoe. They didn't speak much, but the silence didn't press. When she finished, she set the bowl on the table and wiped her hands on her apron. "I've been thinking about the north pasture." Callum looked up. "What about it?" "It's choked with thistle, but the soil's firm. If we cleared it, it'd take potatoes." He leaned back in his chair, setting the knife down. "You've been out that far this morning." "While you were tending the north fence, I walked it." He studied her. "You want to plant?" "I do." He nodded once. "Then we'll clear it." She stepped closer to the fire, warming her hands. "There's something in me that needs to put roots down, not just memory. Something new." "You already started," he said. "You just haven't noticed yet." She turned toward him. The lamplight caught his face in quiet gold, softening the lines near his eyes. "I notice now." He stood and crossed to her, slow but sure. When he reached her, he didn't reach out. Just stood near enough she could feel the heat of him. "I want you here, Josephine, not because you need it, but because I do." She let her breath out, steady and slow. "I don't want to be looked after." "You're not." His voice was low. "You're being chosen." She touched his chest just once, her fingers resting over his shirt. "Then choose me, every day." He covered her hand with his. "I already started," and when he kissed her, it wasn't rushed or stolen, it was sure, it was quiet. It was the kind of kiss that said, "I see you, and I will not turn away." The fire crackled beside them, and outside, the prairie held its breath. The wind shifted again before sunrise, carrying with it the scent of damp wood and prairie sage. Josephine woke early, drawn by the stillness that comes only when the land holds its breath before something new. She dressed by lamplight, careful not to wake Ruth, and stepped outside with her shawl wrapped tight. Callum was already in the field, his silhouette moving slow across the edge of the pasture, pulling the first stubborn thistles by hand. He didn't glance over when she approached, but she saw the way his shoulders eased when her footsteps reached him. "You're ahead of me," she said. "You said you wanted to plant." She knelt beside him, took hold of a root, and pulled. The soil gave after a moment's resistance, damp and dark beneath the weed. "I've never broken ground with someone before," she said. Feels different when you do. They worked without hurry, the sun rising behind them. By the time Ruth brought a basket of biscuits and a jug of water, they'd cleared a stretch wide enough to see the shape of what would come next. That evening, Josephine measured out rows with twine and a stick while Callum dug furrows behind her. Their hands moved without hesitation, each task passed between them like a rhythm learned in silence. When the last seed was pressed into the earth, she stood and brushed the dirt from her palms. "Tomorrow we'll water," she said. Callum nodded. "And the day after, watch." She turned toward him. And after that, he brushed a smear of dirt from her cheek with the back of his finger. "Grow." Inside, Ruth had left a loaf of bread cooling on the windowsill. The house smelled of rosemary and ash. Josephine lit the lamp while Callum washed his hands at the basin, and they ate seated close at the corner of the table, their knees brushing now and then beneath the wood. Later, he brought a book from the shelf, an old volume of poems with the spine cracked from use, and read aloud while she stitched a tear in the hem of her dress. His voice was steady, unhurried, and though his thumb followed the lines on the page, his eyes lifted to hers at the end of each verse. When he closed the book, she set her sewing aside. "You never asked me if I could read," she said. "I knew you could." "How? You look at words like you're listening to them." She reached across the table, her fingers finding his. "I never thought I'd make a life again," she said. "You didn't," he answered. "You're making it now." She rose and crossed to him, taking his face in her hands. He didn't move, just waited, his eyes steady on hers. "I want to marry you," she said. Callum's voice softened. "You sure? I'm tired of waiting for life to happen. This is where I want to be, beside you, on this land. Every day," he stood, his hands coming to her waist. "Then we'll marry when the ground softens after the next rain." They kissed there in the lamplight, nothing hurried, nothing uncertain. She leaned into him, and he held her as if he'd known her shape long before they met. They were married 2 weeks later, beneath the cottonwood near the creek. Ruth stitched Josephine a new dress from linen they'd traded for in town. Callum shaved awkwardly and wore his father's vest. The ranch hand played a fiddle, and the neighbor woman brought a pie. It was small, but it was enough. That night, Josephine stood barefoot in the doorway of the house that would never again be called anything but hers. The wind moved through the grass in low waves, and the sky burned with stars. Callum came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I don't think I've ever felt this steady." "You're not alone now," she leaned back into him. "I know, years passed, not all easy, but none lonely." They built a second room when the child came a boy, born strong and quiet like his father. Josephine taught him to plant by the curve of the moon, and Callum taught him to mend fences without complaint. The land held them, season after season. The potatoes grew in the north pasture. The mare bore 2 more foals before dying old and well-fed. Ruth stayed on until her hair grayed, then moved into the smaller cabin by the orchard, where she could still hear the birds in the morning. They never left Kansas, never needed to. Each year, on the day the foal was born, they walked to the creek hand in hand and said nothing. They didn't need to. Everything they'd buried was still with them, quiet but not sharp, a part of the soil, a part of the living. And every evening, long after the sun dipped low, Callum took Josephine's hand without needing a word, and she followed him inside. Always.